Welcome to Mapping the Journey to Diversity and Inclusion, brought to you by the Greater Wausau Chamber of Commerce. My name is Yengyee Lor, and I am a current board member of the Chamber Board of Directors and president of Faithful Consulting. Today, we're going to hear from leaders at Church Mutual Insurance Company, SI, as they share what they've learned on their diversity and inclusion journey, and discuss advantages of furthering diversity and inclusion efforts among your workforce, your customers, and the communities you serve. This session is designed to be interactive, and we encourage questions from the audience. We're going to wait for questions at the end. Each of the speakers have a little bit of a presentation for you. You may type your questions in the chat box on the left side of the screen at any time. We will try to get to as many questions as possible in time that we have allotted. In addition, there will be a drawing for complimentary admission to the Toward One Wisconsin Conference. And if you haven't been to one, it is great. I've been part of the planning committee in previous years and have attended the Toward One Wisconsin Conference. The drawing will be conducted after the event, and the winner will be contacted directly. The session is being recorded and will be available on the Chamber's YouTube and social media pages following the event. At this time, I'd like to turn it over and get our presentation started with Rich and his team at Church Mutual.
At the Church Mutual family of insurance companies, diversity, equity, and inclusion aren't just words. They are principles woven into the very fabric of our organization. We are driven by a purpose to protect the greater good. We exist to elevate the human condition. And so you can see it in our people, each bringing a unique perspective and making us stronger, regardless of race, religion, gender, or physical ability. You can see it in our customers, whose missions and people are as diverse as the world they exist to serve. You'll find it in our partners, who add breadth and texture to our efforts and propel us to do more, to do better. And you'll find it in the communities where we live and work, where we devote time and resources to create places where everyone can thrive. The Church Mutual family of insurance companies, protecting the greater good.
Good afternoon, everyone. For those of you that do not know me, I'm Rich Poirier. I am the President and Chief Executive Officer at Church Mutual Insurance Company. For those of you that are not familiar with Church Mutual, we have a proud 124-year-old history. We were founded by two Lutheran ministers in Merrill, Wisconsin, as a reaction to an inability to get insurance for churches and houses of worship. So early innovators. I joined the company in 2011 and came over from Wausau / Liberty Mutual, which I know all of you in North Central Wisconsin are very familiar with. By way of my background, I have a bit of diversity in my background. I was born in Nova Scotia, Canada, of French-Canadian parents, emigrated to the United States when I was 2. Grew up in New Haven, Connecticut. If you're familiar with New Haven, that is the home of Yale University, and went to an integrated high school, very progressive area of the country, and then came out to Marquette University to begin college in 1979. So diversity and inclusion is something that I have been privileged and lucky to have had throughout my upbringing and life. When we began the journey at Church Mutual, it was really a deep introspection about our business. If you're not familiar with insurance, a mutual holding company like we are, by definition, means we are owned by all of our policyholders. We have over 100,000 policyholders, primarily, as our name would suggest to you, coming out of houses of worship. But we also write public schools, We're involved in the nonprofit sector, assisted living, and summer camps, secular and both religious. When I came on board, I asked our policy services division, I said, I'd love to see a snapshot of who our owners are and what they look like. And it was revelational. 50% of our owners, 50% of that 100,000 of policyholders I indicated to you, come in three areas: African American, Hispanic, and Asian. And I looked around the company and I said, wow, everybody looks like me. There's a problem here. So I coined the phrase that we were male, pale, and stale, and needed to start making some changes. So I'm blessed to have a great board of directors, and they were very supportive and said, Rich, it starts by hiring a director of diversity so that you walk the walk and talk the talk. So at Church Mutual, before Bruce Carter, who will talk to you, we hired a colleague of mine from Liberty Mutual named John Pribble. John's African American. And I said, John, this is going to be the one time in your life where you get to build something from the ground up, and everyone's going to be watching. So from those humble beginnings in 2014, we started our journey on diversity and inclusion. It began, frankly, with listening. So one of the first things we did is we launched an African American Pastors Advisory Council. And I said to the members, you need to be my eyes and ears. I have a disadvantage living in north central Wisconsin. Although I travel, and we are in all 50 states, we're a $1.2 billion company, I still do not have the day-to-day interactions that you have, the struggles. And this happened long before the tragic events of this past summer in Minneapolis, and of course the very tragic situation in the Asian American community. We wanted to do a deeper dive and understand, where are you hurting? Where are the pressure points? And it was revelational. Man, did the floodgates open. We started hearing terms that are now in vogue today: white privilege, inclusion, economic disparity, disenfranchisement. And it was just instrumental in how we could pivot our company and where we could take our foundation and our giving. COVID last year, I think, really uncovered some inconvenient truths about the disparity in our country. When we looked at the number of deaths, the COVID claims that were coming into our insurance company, disproportionately in communities of color, disproportionately in African American and Hispanic churches. So we were able to pivot our foundation and move to almost 75% of our giving was directed to COVID relief, which we're very proud of. So until you have and ask those tough questions of your group, your owners, you're not going to know where to pivot your company. So we talk about diversity and inclusion, and Bruce Carter, who you will hear from shortly, had a very simple way of explaining it to me. He said, diversity is when you get invited to the dance. You get a card to the dance. But that doesn't mean a whole lot. Inclusion's when you get asked to dance and you're an active participant. We take that very, very seriously at Church Mutual. So all of my executives, all of my key reports, if you look at their individual components on how they earn a raise, we have a diversity component. And we've had that for almost 5 years now. Because it's important that, I've always said, you have to incent what you expect. And it has really made a difference in our hiring, in our outreach to the community, and how we've taken the course of our company. I was down at Marquette University, and I was privileged to host a speaking series where we brought in clergy of various denominations. And never in my time did I think I would have a Muslim cleric, a Catholic priest, a gay Christian Lutheran minister, and an Asian American cleric all sitting together. And we didn't talk about what was different. We talked about what was the same. And there was not a dry eye in the house as we talked about some of the terrible hate crimes that the houses of worship have had to deal with. And one of the seminal discussion points was the very tragic shooting in the Sikh temple down in Milwaukee, and how people learn to bridge the divide. We heard from Dr. Alvin Love, who is the senior pastor at Lilydale Baptist, who grew up in Mississippi, told us the story about earning acceptance into Yale University. But his guidance counselor said, "You're black, and I don't think you're going to do well there. You should go to a historically black college." I had to pinch myself and say, this is 2020. Dr. Love is a very amazing individual, and he has also spoken at Marquette University on our behest. You don't know, Dr. Love was the spiritual advisor for a young man named Barack Obama. And he tells the story, this guy with big ears showed up at my church, and he said, "I want to get into politics." And he said he wouldn't look me in the eye. And I said, "Young man, if you don't learn to look somebody in the eye, you're not going to get far in politics." So having access to those type of leaders in our community is something that we're very proud of. We have insured Ebenezer Baptist Church, which has been in the news lately on several fronts. If you're not familiar, Ebenezer Baptist is the home church of Dr. Martin Luther King and his father, and now Reverend Raphael Warnock, who has been is the first African American male to earn a Senate seat in Georgia. So those are the type of customers we deal with out of Quiet Little Merrill, and why diversity and inclusion is so important to our company. And one of the proudest moments I ever had was when the president of Marquette University said to me, "Rich, I'm very proud to have you as a graduate of our university. You truly run an inclusive tent at Church Mutual." And I said, what is an inclusive tent, Father? What Father Wild? I said, "What does that mean?" He said, "Everyone's welcome." And we, as a trained Jesuit university graduate, I'm happy to know that you were listening, and you carried the message on into your business life. So you're going to hear from some of my team, some of the challenges, some of the strategies. The one central message you will always hear: it is not an excuse that we are located in north central Wisconsin. It is not an excuse that 99% of the population are white and middle class and of European descent. That is a challenge, but it's not an excuse. And you will hear how we have been able to push the needle and improve diversity and inclusion in our community. So with that, I will. Those are the extent of my opening comments. I'll take any questions, and then I'll turn it over to Bruce Carter, who is the Assistant Vice President of Diversity and Inclusion for Church Mutual Insurance. Thank you.
So, Rich, thank you so much for what you're doing. And what I heard high level was that you have started this back in 2014 and kind of had this passion, was very already proactive. So this wasn't started after all the events happened. This was very proactive, in that you saw there was a need and an area here that could really make a difference. So thank you for all that you do. I am curious, how did you build this inclusive culture in your organization?
Really, again, as I mentioned in one of the seminars we had, we start with what binds us, how we're similar, not how we're different. And then we made sure all of our employees received training on unconscious bias. What are the things we bring to the table by virtue of the fact of our upbringing? And how does that affect perceptions on how we treat one another? And one of the great lessons Bruce Carter taught me, I'm all fired up. I'm like, we are going to do so much in the inner city African-American community. And he said, hold on, Rich. Diversity is much bigger than the color of your skin. He said, Rich, you are a diverse candidate because you're a veteran of the United States Navy and you spent 24 years. How many veterans are homeless? And it was like a wake-up call. And he said, how many different, we don't call people disabled, we call them differently able. How many of your brothers and sisters from the military are locked out of work and jobs and economic opportunity because they're differently able? And then lastly, Bruce said to me, there are a lot of people that are struggling with gender identity. And we have people who are powerful in their communities, and they're advocates. So can we get some power from our church leaders to be more inclusive and open eyes? So it was a lot of training, a lot of dialogue, some uncomfortable conversations because of some people's religious beliefs. But we really made some awesome progress, and now it's secondary to the language in our company. It's part and parcel of what we do, but it starts, Yengyee, with education.
Mm-hmm. And how did you really, as you talk about the education, how did you roll this out so that it would be employees would better understand the different cultural perspectives, or the D&I, or the initiatives even that you're working on?
So we worked with Gallup, who you remember from the polls, and we said we want to define our culture. What do we stand for? What does our brand stand for? And the number one thing that came out is we act with honor. We do the right thing. We promote those who help others. And it's just so central to what you do in the journey of inclusion and diversity that you can't ignore it. So we started explaining to people, first and foremost, it's the right thing to do. It's the honorable thing to do. It's the ethical thing to do. But then we took a step further and said, let me explain to you why it's good for business. And we started looking at a lot of really interesting statistics. You've probably read, and Gallup again, church participation in the United States is declining, and it got accelerated during the COVID crisis. In churches of color, whether they're Hispanic, Asian, or African American, church membership is growing. They're bucking the trend. So I've always learned that when human beings, we're all somewhat selfish beings. That's how we're wired. When you explain to people not only why it's the right thing to do, but you attach why it's good for business and it's going to help this company grow and prosper, people start connecting the dots, and they embrace it and they understand it. And they say, that makes a lot of sense, Rich. I get it. So the adoption curve picked up dramatically when we started painting the picture of what our country looks like, and where the buying power, where the political power, where the things that move our nation. I'm not happy that I was right, that we had all this strife in our country the last couple of years, but it certainly validated the journey that we've been taking since 2014, that we were ahead of the curve and we were early adopters. And a lot of our employees now, virtually pull me aside in the hallway because we're not back at work yet and say, hey, Rich, I'm really proud that we weren't Johnny come ladies. We were on this years ago, before it was in vogue, before it was cool, as my kids say, to be diverse. You guys we understand now why this was so important to the company and to you.
Thank you so much, Rich. And I think Bruce is next. And I do see questions, guys. Keep continuing to put your questions in the chat box. We're going to, we want this to be very interactive, but we want to make sure, I think some of your questions will be answered as we're going through the presentation with the rest too. So just know that we are not forgetting your questions, and we will definitely answer them. So we'll go next to Bruce Carter.
Thank you, Yengyee, and thank you, Rich. Appreciate the opportunity today to dialogue with you. Again, my name is Bruce Carter. I'm the Assistant Vice President of Diversity and Inclusion for Church Mutual Insurance Company. A little bit about me. I'm a native of Shreveport, Louisiana, Air Force brat, raised in Duluth, Minnesota. So I'm somewhat familiar with the weather challenges, but also the values of the Midwest. I did my undergraduate at the University of Minnesota in African American Studies, my master's in Human Resources, and I had a great career in human resources spanning 3 continents. I was semi-retired doing some consulting, and John Tribble, who Rich mentioned earlier, joined Church Mutual and would call occasionally about D&I. And one day he calls and says, Bruce, I've been promoted. I said, great. And he says, and I'm looking for my replacement. I said, well, I'll give you some names. He says, no, we want to talk to you. I said, come on, John. I'm in Dallas. I'm playing golf 3 days a week. I'm doing consulting at my convenience. At least come and, he said, well, at least come and talk to us. I said, John, I left dealing with immature CEOs. Why do I want to go back and do that again? So I accepted the invitation and went to Church Mutual. And I guess like in the movie Jerry Maguire, when Tom Cruise is trying to apologize to Renee Zellweger and she just stops him and says, you had me with hello. Well, you understand why after listening to Rich, how I went back to Texas and decided I want to be a part of what Rich is building at Church Mutual Insurance Company. So I joined in October of 2018. And one of the first things that Rich asked me to do, he says, we need a diversity and inclusion strategy. And I'd like for you to put that together and present it to the board in March. And I said, okay, well, I'll start some discussions, of course, by talking with the officers who lead the organization to get their assessment of where we are, where they want to go, and the degree of involvement. So we put together the plan, presented it to the board, and we'll talk more about our 5 pillars around the strategy, but it's over 5 years with tangible annual metrics. What gets measured gets rewarded, what's rewarded gets repeated. So my team and I work with employees all across our organization, becoming a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive company. And as Rich talked about, diversity and inclusion, being invited to the party, being asked to dance. And the other piece of that is a sense of belonging. And they're playing our music. So be it polka, be it salsa, be it R&B, be it rock, then we all feel as though that we're welcomed and valued and can bring our whole selves to work. Our goal is for diversity and inclusion to be woven into the very fabric of our company throughout leadership with all the employees across the organization, customers, partners, and outreach programs. So as we discuss diversity and inclusion today, I asked you to consider 2 questions. 1, how can businesses contribute to creating communities that are welcoming and inclusive? Again, how can businesses contribute to create communities that are welcoming and inclusive? 2nd, how does doing business in a welcoming and inclusive community support your success? How does doing business in a welcoming and inclusive Wausau, North Central Wisconsin community support your success? So we all know diversity, fairness, and equal access are relevant to business leaders and society as a whole. As Rich has indicated, the CEO sets the pace and the culture. The importance of having business leaders linked and working in the community cannot be overstated. And our community's success depends on making sure everyone who's a part of it feels as though they are welcome. And becoming a more welcoming community, more jobs are created by immigrant entrepreneurs and a thriving economy that benefits us all. But we need to connect. I want to point out the impact business leaders can make in our communities if they choose to do so by an example of what Rich has done as our president and CEO. He talked about CM Cares and pivoting last year to provide more relief in the wake of COVID and recovery efforts. Rich was instrumental in the starting of our first employee resource group, the Women Leadership Initiative in 2016, where women leaders had a chance to come together to talk, to focus on their development, and to suggest how we could become more inclusive and provide opportunities for them to advance in the company. Rich established the D&I team. One of the things that I brag about all the time is that we have 1 diversity and inclusion professional for every 300 employees. And that's big. Oftentimes we'll see 1 diversity and inclusion person for organizations that have several thousand employees. But again, that speaks to the commitment. A friend of mine once said that a dream without resources is a nightmare. So Rich, in terms of wanting his vision and dream around D&I to come forward, stepped to the plate and has funded D&I. So along with myself, I have 2 other team members. Alexandra Oles, she works out of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. She's focused on the Hispanic market. Lynn Liu out of LA, she's focused on the Asian market as we continue to become a more diverse organization. As Rich indicated last year in the wake of the George Floyd tragedy, Rich pulled together all of our officers and over 3 days went through courageous conversations, which were designed for us all to listen, learn, and engage. And when we talk about listening to understand, not listening to respond. And remember, listen and silent have the same letters in them. So not necessarily we all agree, but we at least listen to each other's point of view. We did biracial podcasts, and Rich is one of the founding members and is the co-convener of the Toward One Wisconsin initiatives. Again, walking the talk. So to facilitate real change, the business community and policymakers have to work together. And so solving complex social problems creates a more positive business environment. And a business over the long term, as we all know, will have difficulty thriving in an unhealthy community, especially when it is competing with other major cities. Talent migrates to opportunities and a higher quality of life. So enlightened and well-developed business leaders are stepping up to not only build thriving businesses, but thriving communities, because those leaders know that they can uniquely work as catalysts to bring nonprofits, government leaders, educators, foundations, chambers of commerce, and faith-based communities together to address complex problems. One of our greatest areas of opportunities at Church Mutual is diverse talent acquisition and retention. Race still matters. Instead of focusing desperately to recruit from outside the state of Wisconsin to fill a growing skills gap and limited diverse talent, companies should also maximize the resources that exist within their own communities. So one of the things we're looking at Church Mutual is the Hmong community is an often overlooked resource when it comes to recruiting for diversity. There's also a large Native American population in Wisconsin and neighboring states. And again, women and minorities remain underrepresented in company leadership when compared to the numbers they represent in our country's population. We at Church Mutual are like a lot of companies in the financial services industry. We do better with women than we do people of color. We want to build upon that and take the opportunity to replicate how to be more successful there. So again, our biggest opportunity at Church Mutual is representation of Black, Indigenous, and people of color in leadership and sales positions. And we're committed to improving. One of the things we put in place in 2019 was a diverse candidate slate policy. That policy is based on the Rooney Rule that we've heard about in terms of the NFL, that for key positions, a person of color and a woman needs to be on the slate. They don't have to be selected, but at least considered. Harvard University did a study. And out of that study, what they found is that when you had a candidate slate and it only included one female, the chances of that female being selected was virtually nil. The same holds true for people of color. And so by having a diverse candidate slate policy, which we put in place, it was our own, and we've gone through some revisions, but all management, leadership, and sales positions requires a candidate slate. Initially, there was some consternation and concern, but again, speaking volumes to the people and the leadership at Church Mutual, we plugged a few holes, fixed some things, and now our diverse candidate slate policy has been very successful. We set a goal of 85%, and within less than 2 years, we're already at 80%. And again, speaks volumes about who our people are. We also are committed to improving our opportunities to find the best qualified candidates and to keep them. The Wisconsin brain drain, the University of Wisconsin-Madison, over the last 10 years says 60% of the grads left the state. We also have the challenge of people of color not necessarily wanting to come to Wisconsin or coming to Church Mutual because they don't want to be the first and the only. The continued migration of people of color to the new South cities, where job opportunities are perceived to be better, home ownership rates and entrepreneurial opportunities may also be higher. So the Dallas is where I live, the Houstons, the Atlantas, the Charlottes. And then another potential issue is the community isolation and opportunity to be involved in community issues. We at Church Mutual also recognize and commit to being creative with remote work opportunities. And that should help open up some additional doors of talent that maybe in the past we haven't been able to attract. The last thing I wanted to talk about is, again, as Rich indicated, Central Wisconsin is a great place to live and work. It may not be for everyone. Some people of color would find it very attractive for the things that are offered there, both in terms of the quality of life and the companies like Church Mutual. and some of the organizations that make up the Wausau Chamber, and we need to continue to sell those as well. So I don't want to hog all the time, but again, thank you for allowing me to make some introductory remarks.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. And I think it starts with a high level. It sounds like we had a CEO that's very supportive of this, that allowed the creation of your DEI unit, and then you guys broke out some goals and objectives and made sure it was really measurable and moving from there. Would you say this would work if we're kind of answering Ying's question here, if leadership was not buying in to this at some level?
It would not work. Organizations reflect the leader. And if the leader is not committed and doesn't surround him or herself with people who buy in and act upon that vision, it can't be successful. People do as their leaders reward them or punish them for. So if your leader indicates it's important, reinforces it by walking the talk, the success metrics are in place, and you follow them, then you'll get the results that are needed. One of the things that we haven't talked about, and Rich mentioned earlier, though, was education. So in addition to the unconscious and bias training and privilege training, in our organization, following the officers' meeting around courageous conversations, the officer said, let's push this down to the whole organization. So all employees at Church Mutual Insurance Company went through a session on courageous conversations on race, and we have one on privilege coming up. But one of the things that we did, and again, this was, the support of Rich, when we put together the D&I plan, the proposal was to establish what we call a dialogue and diversity series, that we'd bring in speakers from various communities to talk about understanding those communities, how we could provide better customer service, and our policyholders. And Rich, again, stepping out on faith, provided the dollars. And we've been able to bring in speakers, including Dr. Cobbs, who did important work in terms of the contribution of women during World War I. We had the president of the Tuskegee Airmen Foundation come in and spoke with us. Last year, we had Cheyenne Webb Chrisberg, whom Dr. King referred to as this littlest marcher from the Selma to Montgomery march. And we've had people like Andrew Kirker, who Scott was probably going to talk about, who's a Paralympic Olympic skier. So dialogue and talking and continue to reinforce and provide people an opportunity to learn pays dividends in terms of supporting a culture that's led by a committed CEO and team.
Awesome. Now, there's a question in here that I thought, just piqued my interest a little bit. And I wanted to ask you before we move on to Scott here next, what is meant by voting with wallets?
Voting with wallets. Okay. Well, one of the things, especially in the wake of George Floyd, people are becoming, many consumers during this time are reckoning with the question, how can I change my consumption habits to support causes that matter? African Americans are now 58% more likely to expect brands they buy to take a social stance, and 37% of them are more likely to buy a brand when they do. It's not just African Americans. The Black Lives Matter movement have influenced allies to take action as well. For example, Hispanic consumers outpace African Americans in their expectations that the brands they buy support social causes as well. And the source of that was Scarborough, USA in September of last year. And racial equity is not just an issue that applies to Black, Brown, and Latino communities. Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders are also the fastest growing ethnic population in the US, according to the Pew Research Center. So people of color have a $3.9 trillion buying power. So I think that you keep that in mind, as Rich talked about, not only being the right thing to do, there's a business opportunity in terms of becoming more diverse and respond to your diverse customer base. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Bruce. Let's move on to Scott. There's a lot of questions coming in, and I'll wait towards the end to ask some of this. If it somewhat correlates to one of the speakers' topic, I will ask then, but I am keeping an eye out for your questions. So just know that I'm not skipping them. I will incorporate it in as it fits. Scott, do you want to go next?
Sure, I'll go. Thank you for having me join you today. I'm actually going to start with a question. Have you ever had an experience interacting with someone that maybe didn't look like you or believe like you, and it just left a significant imprint on your memory? My team works closely with Bruce Carter and his team to help advance diversity and inclusion efforts internally and externally. But before Church Mutual, I spent over 30 years working in Chicago with very large corporations. And the people within my company reflected our customers' gender, race, lifestyle. The blend was normal. Our vendors were the same, reflecting the diversity of those that they worked with. And the neighborhoods where my wife and I raised our family also reflected that diversity. It was normal to interact with or do business with, go out to dinner with people from all walks of life, cultures, backgrounds, perspectives, and ethnicities. Diversity and inclusion were woven into the fabric of my life. And what we see today right here in our community, in Wausau, Merrill, in the area, our businesses, is the journey to move past diversity and inclusion as a goal, a separate initiative, and have it become normalized, just part of who we are, what we do, and how we interact. But that's going to take time, effort, and thoughtful conversations and actions by all of us. But even in our larger, more diverse cities and businesses, it's still a journey. I think that journey is really evident as we see that what's going on throughout the country. But when I worked in Chicago, I remember sitting down with a print vendor. His name was Ed. Ed was African American and had been a terrific rep for our company. And at the end of one of our meetings, Ed looked at me and asked if he could share something personal. And I said, sure. And Ed shared that he was working on closing a new client, a really big new client, and that he had found out that they wanted to do business with this company, but didn't want him as their rep because he was Black. Now, to their credit, his company refused to change and walked away from that business, but Ed was hurt and angry. How in a city like Chicago could there still be people that felt that way? He wanted to know how I felt about it. And I looked at Ed and I paused and I said, Ed, I never knew that about you. And he looked at me, he was a bit puzzled, and he said, you knew what? And I said, I never knew you were Black. You've always just been Ed. He was stunned for just a minute, and then we both laughed. And I told him not to worry about it. He wasn't losing a new customer. They were losing the best rep they'd probably ever have. Their loss, not his. This occurred over 20 years ago, yet I can still see Ed sitting in that conference room talking with me. It left an imprint on my memory forever. Their loss, not his. That company could have improved the quality of their product, been exposed to an innovative printing company that was at the forefront of digital printing, and worked with someone that would care about their projects, bring superior knowledge and experience to the table, and guide them to success. They not only messed up on diversity being good for their bottom line, they blew the opportunity to understand how the right person was just the right person, regardless of race. If that company felt that way about its vendors, it's safe to assume they probably felt that way about their employees, jeopardizing their ability to attract and retain great talent. As Wausau strives to strengthen its business community, it's important to remember that diversity and inclusion does more than contribute to your bottom line. By weaving into the fabric of your culture, it will contribute to the vibrancy of our community through ideas, perspectives, festivals, foods, arts, organizations, and most importantly, people. Now, I once asked a person how they would feel if they got up and spent every day with someone just like themselves. They looked like themselves, they talked like themselves, they had exactly the same likes and viewpoints. And they responded, well, that would be really, really boring. And I said, yeah, it would. They wouldn't advance. They wouldn't innovate. They'd work only to satisfy the same person every day. Their mind wouldn't expand. They wouldn't be introduced to new ideas or experiences. They would live their life in front of a mirror that only reflected themselves. They'd never have an experience that would leave an imprint on their memory forever. Today, as we talk and discuss what's going on, we hope our insights illustrate how important it is that we don't look into that mirror and see a reflection of just ourselves, but rather we take a closer look into that mirror look deep beyond the image in front of us and instead see a reflection of a dynamic and energizing, diverse and inclusive workplace and community. So thank you again, and listening to my story. I appreciate it. And I'm all set.
Thank you, Scott, for sharing your story with us. Now, you mentioned the bottom line. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, let's start with statistics. 35%. McKinsey and Company study show that firms with a higher diversity quotient are 35% more likely to post above average financial returns than their national industry medians. 19%. That same study showed companies that have more diverse management teams have a 19% higher revenue due to innovation. 21 and 27%. Boston Consulting Group has found that companies in the top quartile for gender diversity on executive teams were 21% more likely to outperform on profitability and 27% more likely to have superior value creation. So diversity is good for the bottom line. But why is that? Is it because a diverse staff somehow automatically means more profit? Does it mean that a diverse staff knows how to make more money than a non-diverse staff? I don't think that's it. At Church Mutual, we believe it's because diversity and inclusion means so much more than simply differences in how we look. We found that people with different lifestyles, backgrounds, cultures, religions, they challenge us to be more insightful, creative, innovative, and understanding. It's those attributes that drive a better bottom line, that keep us from getting complacent and stale and from falling behind. And it's those attributes that are going to drive us to advance and continue to do better.
Thank you, Scott. And I wonder, along your journey, what were some of the challenges? What about fear of the unknown from employees? Just curious, any of that that you can speak to?
Well, for one thing, when people talk about the D&I journey, realize that there's not an end. It only takes you to new destinations and experiences. And building that vibrancy of the different ideas and ethnicities and talents and genders and cultures within our family, why it is a great thing to do. It isn't easy. We are challenged at Church Mutual, as Rich alluded to, and as Bruce talked about some of the things. We're challenged by our location, our current diversity employee makeup, social issues, ingrained ways of we've always done it this way, lack of exposure to the different cultures, African American, Hispanic, Asian, about even careers in insurance. We're attacking many fronts, and it is a battle. But as you heard, we are taking action. One of our values, Rich talked about, we act with honor. One of our other values is we're bold and courageous. We have an employee series, as you heard about, the dialogue and diversity. And he talked about Andrew Kirka, who's a young man that at a young age became disabled and lost use of both of his legs, but didn't quit. And now he is a Olympic, Paralympic gold medalist. And we help sponsor him because we believe in his story and what he represents. And he's an inspiration to people. You've heard about the founding member of Toward One Wisconsin, but we also support the MKE Fellows Program in Milwaukee. It provides internships for young Black men as they're trying to pursue and complete their college career. We also provide support and scholarships for historically Black colleges and universities. We're partnering with the National Hispanic Christian Leadership Conference and so many other organizations and groups that we're partnering with to learn, support, and advance. And our innovation lab, even internally at our company, that mines the experiences and knowledge of all of our employees to pursue new ideas that help our customers. We don't just rely on a small group of people to advance the innovation. We reach out because we understand that all these different ideas and perspectives that we have in our company can make us better and stronger. And we mentioned our COVID-19 Protecting the Greater Good Recovery Fund. We provided over $500,000 to community and organizations across the nations that were hit hardest by the virus. But one of the cool things about that was there was over 450 organizations that we helped. So we were able to help so many small churches, food pantries, people that had medical needs, as well as donate to the larger ones that could reach so many. And we had hundreds of thank you notes and acknowledgments of the help. And so as we take each step towards diversity and inclusion, we do see the leaps and bounds in the difference that we're making. And that's really part about it. And you can learn more about our efforts if you want to visit our website. I'm going to do a plug here, churchmutual.com/diversity. You can go out and learn a lot more about what we're doing. That was churchmutual.com/diversity. And then, as we sit here, Wausau businesses are still probably kind of, well, how can I take action? Small businesses are wearing many hats, and plus they're dealing with COVID. And medium-sized businesses, you're trying to grow. Large businesses, you're trying to expand your footprint within Wisconsin, maybe nationally, maybe even globally. And it can really start to, but it starts with a belief that diversity and inclusion are not just about skin color, but rather about the uniqueness each individual brings to the table. Their experiences may include their skin color, but also their culture, their education, their work history, their communities. There's so many elements that make up a person. And next, there has to be that commitment, such as you're seeing from Rich and now our entire company, to build that diverse workforce that can contribute to the growth and strength of your company and our community. It's looking deep into that mirror and seeing a reflection of Wausau that allows everyone to better understand, connect, and grow personally and professionally to build a diverse and inclusive community. I do want to add one quick thing here. I received a note from an employee last Friday, and it was a note about our efforts. And she said something, I'm not going to share her name, but her sentiment meant a lot to me. She said, this organization is not pretending to have the answer or rushing to put unsustainable diversity objectives in place to look good. For right now, they are being a sounding board through educational forums and facilitating open expression experiences. They are a voice and advocate for customers and employees that have experienced or witnessed the pain that the lack of inclusion promotes. They walk the walk and demonstrate different practices that real people can follow and appreciating. Healing can happen. I couldn't have said it better. Don't pretend, move it forward, and healing can happen.
Wow, thank you. Thank you for that sharing, Scott. Now I'm going to move to some of the questions in the box. And so I'm going to skim through a little bit and see what's been highlighted here. So it's going to be opened to any one of you, Rich, Bruce, or Scott, if you feel passionate to add or answer any of these questions. But from Samantha, does Church Mutual have a D&I committee? Is this what the team per 100 employees is that Bruce spoke about? What are the roles and expectations of the D&I team member?
Okay, why don't I start? Rich, why don't you go first?
Well, Yengyee, I would start by saying we all own it. We all are a part of the committee. It is a requirement if you're an officer in the company to be an active participant in the committee. It is part and parcel of what you do. And I have always, we have one overarching theme that I have asked everybody to consider. Most of us were blessed with having kids. I have 4 millennials that I'm proud to say were products of the Wausau West School District. And they pushed Dad pretty hard. They went off to college and they're progressive. And I always say to my staff, is this a place you would be proud to have your children work for? And if you can't answer yes to that, then we've got a problem. So it starts with, is this something that if we open the vault and we let our children, or flip it, our parents, our significant others, our partners, is this a place you'd be proud to let them see behind the curtain? And if you can't answer yes to that, then the standing direction to the committee is, if you're not, just don't come in and complain that something's not working. You got to come with it. Your ticket to the dance is a solution. No solution is crazy, because if you don't have a solution, you're part of the problem. And with that, we have, and Bruce is going to go into a little more, we have some incredibly robust committee conversations where people have said, Rich, you talk this, that, and I don't think you've gone far enough. You're not bold enough. They challenge me, which I think is healthy, is very healthy. So Bruce, we've got more formal procedures around this. Why don't you cover that quickly? But
Okay. A little help with the slides, I think, but basically our 5-year D&I strategy begins with a vision statement. And that vision statement is beyond boundaries. And the vision statement, quite frankly, says we must not allow the boundaries of exclusion to restrict opportunity at Church Mutual Insurance Company. We must become a magnet for openness, diversity, and inclusion in our community and our company. So Scott mentioned, as did Rich, our D&I journey. And rather than taking you through those pieces, I think the question was around, did we have a diversity committee or employee resource groups? We currently have an employee advisory council. We're in the process of putting together a proposal for a diversity council as well as employee resource groups. The current model we have is our own Women's Leadership Initiative, which Rich started in 2016, as shown by the map. So we'll use that as the prototype as we explore the need and respond to employees' questions around additional resource groups. One of the other things I do want to point out about our D&I journey, as you can see, a lot began really coming into shape in 2019, but there was a strong foundation there. Rich talked about 50% of our policyholders are people of color. And one of the things that we want to continue to work and build upon, the employees who sold those policies were not necessarily people of color. So one of the tenets of what we want to do is to recognize the contributions, the strong foundation, and build upon that. Our workforce, we want to represent those communities, but at the same time, everyone's contribution is valued. And we want to continue to recognize the contributions of people who aren't necessarily people of color, who are not necessarily disabled, who are straight, and also part of that very fabric, because we need everyone to bring their whole selves to work and share how we become a better organization.
Thank you, Bruce. Scott, do you have anything to add to that? Or I'll move to the next question.
Just to reinforce what Rich said, that it is a holistic committee that we're all driven for, and it starts from the top down and really goes there. But then you get a note from one of the employees like that, and it just makes your heart sing that you're on the right track.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that was a powerful note.
Mm-hmm.
So we're moving on to Richard, and I know we have only 30 minutes and lots of questions in the chat box, guys. So we'll try to get through as many as we can. So thank you everyone for being patient. How successful would have Rich had been if the board had not pushed back on these initiatives? How does the conversation change with board members?
Wow. Well, if you're familiar with how corporates run, everyone thinks when you're the CEO, you're the boss. No, I have 12 bosses. They're called my board of directors. But more importantly, I have 100,000 other bosses called my owners. And the board is elected to represent the will of the ownership. That's what's important about a mutual. When I joined Church Mutual, interestingly, our longest standing board member was an attorney named Walter J. White, who was African American. He was practicing law in London, and he would come 5 times a year across the pond, as they say. Mm-hmm. And Walter, who's now retired from our board, took a liking to me, and he said, "You're different because you want to hear." And he pulled me aside and he pressed me hard. He said, "Rich, you just scratched." I was all proud of the Women's Leadership Initiative, and Walter's like, "Dude, you're not even scratching the surface. You gotta." And he said, "I will be your champion. I will get behind you when you go and ask for funding, and I will be vocal." So the quick answer to that excellent question is I would have been dead in the water if I had not, because your board allocates the resources and the assets. When you go ask for money, normally boards are, hey, what's the return on investment? How is this going to grow business? And Walter was able to help me cut through a lot of that and say, a lot of this is unknown, folks. but it's central to what we do here. We're a faith-based organization whose tagline is promoting the greater good. Shame on us that we haven't done more. So, having the code word in corporate America is a rabbi, so a trusted advisor in Walter, just was so amazing. Dr. Lori Wires, who runs NTC, always said, Rich, what do you need? Come over to NTC and look at my student body, walk around my building and see how many people and how diverse we are. I've got your back on this, and so forth and so on. Jim McIntyre, who runs Greenheck, was a board member at the time, very supportive, pushing me, saying, the dollars and cents are fine, you're balanced, but what are you doing in these non-financial areas? So I was blessed. I had people pushing me rather than resisting me, and it made my job just so much easier.
Wow. Yeah. So great question, Richard. And again, this is really a top leadership that has to really buy into this for this to work, it sounds like. We'll go to the next question. How did you determine what were the most important, impactful initiatives while you were building your DEI strategy? So this is from Yang Zhang.
Well, thank you, Yang Zhang, and I'll turn it over to Bruce and Scott in a minute, but listening, pulsing your ownership. And I talked about the African American pastors group that we said. I have an employee advisory group. You've got to have the courage to ask the uncomfortable questions. And I remember talking to a lot of the pastors that sit on our advisory council have PhDs, theology, social science. These are folks that are very learned and schooled. And one of the most impactful ones, and I know it'll touch on another question that was asked about equity. We had Reverend Haynes, Dr. Haynes in Chicago and Dallas, who's a good friend of Bruce's, said, Rich, are you aware that your zip code determines your longevity? It determines your chance of surviving COVID. And he just started rattling off. And I said, I've never thought of it that way. He says, your zip code determines your access to healthcare and your education. That's the shame of this country. Your zip code tells a lot about your trajectory in life. And we said, wow, let's reverse engineer this and start allocating and looking at some initiatives that will allow us to flip this. So we said, we got to do more with scholarships. We got to do more with helping break this terrible circle of economic disparity. I'm the first in my family to go to college. And I remember I came to Marquette with a suitcase. My dad dropped me off and said, good luck to you. I didn't even know what was the right fork or spoon. Didn't know how to interview. So, I mean, I was one of the lucky ones. I was white. So I look at these young men and women, and I do a lot of work at the Marathon County Boys and Girls Club. And one of the things we look at when we sponsor young Hmong kids who are so bright, top of their class, the transition to adulthood in corporate America, some of these kids don't have a mentor or the resources. So mentorship, education, setting them up for success. It's not just about throwing money at people. It's the continuum of how you prepare. So that caused us, these conversations and some of our experience caused us to shift our focus. When Dr. Haynes said, Rich, go look at the COVID stats. Go look at how many African American ministers have died in the first 6 months. And then we started talking to the Hispanic Christian leadership and started seeing even worse numbers. And the new thing is a lot of people don't have access to internet, so they don't know how to sign up and get access to get a vaccine. So we said, hey, here are some areas we can help. Financial literacy, internet literacy, education. it's not just about throwing money at the problem or sponsoring a couple of events. It's got to go, and nothing says more about your company than hiring people from these communities and embedding them into your corporate culture. So I know that was a bit of a long-winded answer, but that's how the priorities kind of spelled themselves out by themselves as we continue to take the journey, and it's not static. As Scott Steele said, it's a journey. Our initiatives and our priorities are going to continue to change and move with the events around us. We're starting to talk about environmental issues that affect our business and people. I think food insecurity, clean air, clean water, they're going to start becoming, and again, driven by your zip code. Dr. Haynes said, you know how many African-American neighborhoods or schools are over toxic waste sites because nobody wanted that land? Go do your homework, Rich, and you're going to be appalled. So I'll turn it over to my two distinguished colleagues, but those are some examples of how the journey informed the initiatives in this and what we decided would be priorities.
Well, I don't have much to add. Rich, certainly hit it very well. The one thing I will point out related to COVID and the zip codes, one of the things that was new to me was that 45% of Americans don't have access to transportation. So you think in terms of even getting to a vaccination site, how challenging that can be. Scott, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, getting some back. If you guys get going, mute. The Bruce, I actually kind of want to turn it back to you because one of the things you did really well was brought structure, the 5 pillars of our journey. And what that did is for each one of our departments, and as we worked through it, we each had accountability and responsibility to this. And you might want to share those 5 pillars.
Okay, thanks, Scott. Yes, so we have 5 pillars of our diversity inclusion strategy. And the first pillar is what we call organizational competency, which is about education and awareness, as well as we did our first D&I survey in 2019 to get our fingers on the pulse of how employees felt about our welcomeness and opportunities for D&I. The other piece that fits into that was the training that Rich talked about, the unconscious bias training, as well as privilege. The second pillar is diverse representation. That's where we introduce the diverse candidate slate policy, took a look at how we could expand the net, because if you expand our net when it comes to recruiting, we have unbiased selection process, then we will, on the other end, have hires that look like that net that we cast. Our third area was marketing, working with Scott and his team in terms of how do we come up with marketing strategies that provide us a greater opportunity to tap into underutilized markets. We set goals around having brokers that were female, brokers that were people of color, and set actual targets in terms of revenue dollars brought in by those groups. Our next pillar was supplier diversity. So last year we launched our first supplier diversity program with a registration portal that encouraged diverse organizations to sign up for opportunities when they became available through our request for proposal process. One of the things that we recognized is small businesses create more jobs than large corporations. So businesses such that make up the Wausau Chamber are an important part of all communities. You uplift those businesses, you uplift those communities as well. Then our fifth pillar was our foundation, strengthening partnerships and with needs. Scott did a tremendous job last year with the repositioning of the foundation's dollars and focus on in COVID. We provided more dollars to people of color organizations than we had in the history of the foundation. Rich, the foundation started, was that 2016 as well?
Yes.
Yeah. So those are the five pillars and the foundation of how we prioritize.
Thank you, Bruce. And I think that answers Samantha Diedrich's question about what is the strategies. So Samantha, if it doesn't, you can let me know down there, but they basically have 5 pillars and set strategies around these 5 pillars and make sure it's really measurable. So hopefully that answers your question. A question from Yiling Zhang. You mentioned a lot about diversity and inclusion, but what about equity? Is that something business and government should be supportive of as well?
The short answer is yes.
Yes.
But
and equity is a broad term. So, yes. You know, when we look at equity, it starts with having a voice or a seat at the table. But it even goes deeper than that. It's education. It's, as Bruce, one of the things we learned in our own backyard, when a lot of the kids had to go to school remotely, not everyone has equal broadband. There's equity disparities in education. The kids that get forced, you know, if you're living out in rural Merrill or Lincoln County or Anago, Langlade, you're not going to have the same advantages as a kid in Wausau because you have broadband insecurity. It's stuff you don't even think about. But one of the central themes on why we believe D&I is so important is leveling the playing field. And isn't what equity is about? If you have a level playing field, then you can always achieve your potential. And it starts with, I think it starts with having secure meals, a secure place to live, and then education. Because my father, who, you know, was lucky to get out of high school, he always told me, once you get that college degree, it's so important, they can never take that from you. And if you, and all of the speakers we have brought in, the Tuskegee Airmen, the central theme's always been, education is the great leveler in society. It gets you a seat at the table, and it just breaks this vicious circle. And when I say education, it doesn't necessarily mean college. We got some of the best trade schools in the country in our backyard. Not everybody should or needs to go to college, but getting education, whether it's vocational or like, solves a lot of problems. It really does. So yeah, equity is a big part of what we espouse and how we set priorities with how our foundations, you know, going to give money or things we're going to invest in as a company. Absolutely.
You're on mute.
Oh, can you guys hear me? Bruce and Scott, do you guys have more to add to that?
Well, I'll just say, when we did a poll with our African American Pastors Advisory Group last year in the midst of the strong social turmoil, and we asked them, you know, what topics can we talk about that you would like to hear Church Mutual prioritize as far as what we could do. And on top of the list by far was education. And they said that, just as Rich was saying. So, you know, that's something we truly believe in. That's one of the pillars of our CM Cares Foundation is education. And so, you know, it's not proven out just by how we believe, it's proven out by who those we do business with.
Okay. I don't hear anything from you, Bruce, so I'm assuming nothing to add to that, and I'll move on to the next questions. We still have about 5 or 6.
Yes, please move on.
Keep moving. What have you learned about yourself and your organization along with DE&I journey from Cody Pierce?
Yeah, I'll pass because I told you the story about Ben, and that was an eye-opener. So I'll defer to Bruce and Scott.
Okay. Well, one thing that I'll share, that's a good question, is that we all can learn in our D&I journey. One of the stories I shared with our leadership team when I joined, prior to working at Church Mutual, I worked for Nationwide Insurance, and I had a similar role around D&I. And I hired a young lady who was from Peru to be a part of the team. And a few weeks after her joining, we had an opportunity to introduce the D&I team members to the leadership. And I introduced Anna as a person of color, and we're glad she was there. Well, following the meeting, she came to my office and she said, Bruce, can I speak with you for a moment? I said, sure. She said, you made me very uncomfortable in a comment you made today. I said, wow, okay, I'm sorry, what was it? She says, you referred to me as a person of color. I'm from Peru, I'm white, and I speak Spanish. So we're all going to make mistakes when it comes to engaging. But the important piece is that we all want to respect individuals, give them access to all resources, and to continue to work to understand the similarities, as Rich indicated, as we communicate. So I make mistakes too, even as a quote D&I thought leader in the organization. We all have to try.
Now, as far as what I think I've learned about myself, I think there's a certain humbleness that comes with understanding that small things make a big difference. You know, when you're in marketing, you want the splash, you want the big stuff. You know, in your corporation, you want all that. But as we've gone through this journey, and Bruce has been really, really a great partner in teaching me some of the little things that we do with building relationships, keep them moving. It's not always about the sale. You know, there's a whole lot of things like that. So I think what I've learned myself is the bigger picture. I think I've done, you know, I was fortunate to live in, you know, a very, you know, normalized type of a situation. And I came up to Merrill and it wasn't the same. And so there was a little bit of a culture shock there for me. But at the same time, I realized that even though I had lived that in Chicago, I hadn't necessarily experienced it nor advanced it. And so I've learned from myself is that, you know, find ways. I mean, Bruce and I will get into something and we say, instead of saying we can't do that, I have a saying in my department, give me options, not obstacles. And I stress that all the time because we may not be able to do exactly what we want to do, but we can do something.
Love it. Moving right along. From Paul Harold, was it training content developed internally or did you partner with an outside resource to assist our senior leaders then facilitating these sessions?
Bruce, you want to take that one?
Sure. We work with an organization called the Kaleidoscope Group out of Chicago, and they're one of the premier diversity and inclusion organizations. And we worked with them initially in terms of talking with our officers around diversity and inclusion. We had some officer-led sessions, and then we contracted with them to provide bias training that's done electronically. All new employees come in and they go through that course. We also utilize them to develop our supervisor training program that took diversity and inclusion up to the next level. This summer, when we had these sessions we talked about with the officers on courageous conversations following the killing of George Floyd, we utilized them as well to facilitate. And one of the things that came out of that meeting, the officers has pushed us down throughout the organization. We worked and put together courageous conversations, which were led by our supervisors. And some of you might ask, how come the D&I people didn't do these sessions? Well, we believe that two things we know from research. Employees want to hear from their CEO, and they want to hear messages from their immediate supervisor. So we readied our supervisors internally by having opportunities for them to go through train the trainers, and they delivered the training. The response in terms of the surveys afterwards, the employees felt that it was very successful. And again, talking about learning moments, I think our supervisors feel even better now about being able to handle courageous conversations. And it did pay off that our supervisors were engaged and lead that initiative. Richard, Scott?
Nope,
Okay.
You got it.
You said it.
Thank you, Bruce. Pushing us right along too. So Yiling has a great question here. How do you work with other leaders within your organization who are not supportive of D&I efforts, especially if they are members of the board?
First and foremost, there are no board members that are not 100% supportive of this. So it is a problem I don't have. And I'll be somewhat indelicate. I don't have problems with leaders because if you're not on board, you don't work for our company. You're removed. And I thankfully have not had to do that. But if that day comes, you will not be a part of the Church Mutual organization. We have zero tolerance. So kind of a simple one. It's inconsistent with our culture and you won't work for us.
I love it. Bruce, Scott, do you have more to add on maybe how did you?
I think just to take it, when you say leaders, I want to take it down to the manager supervisor level for a minute, because, Rich is, absolutely right with regard to top leadership is all on board. And that's where that courageous conversations has really come in helpful, because you're able to really talk through a lot of things and address some of their feelings in a confidential manner. And you're able to help move them along in a way that they're not going to feel like there's going to be any kind of, repercussions, and answer questions and talk through some things and follow up. I think that's one of the bigger things, is the follow up, because if you don't get them to where they, need to be, you can continue to work with them to try to get them there. So I think leadership for leadership is part of the solution as well.
Yeah. Hey, Bruce, we had a supervisor who was a white supremacist when I was chief operating officer. And we had a conversation with the individual and told them that, this is inconsistent with our culture. And while we respect your freedom of speech, you cannot have offensive things on your vehicle, and you can't park on the property. And they continued to push it, and we terminated them. But that is the only one that I can remember in my 10 years with the company, frankly. People, if anything, they're pushing me to run faster on this.
Wow.
And you have to do this in a sequential manner that doesn't leave people behind. And I don't see it on a religious and ethnic. As you start getting into gender identity, LGBTQ, we have employees that have deep religious feelings. They're very staunch Christians. And I think Scott was alluding to that. We want them to feel comfortable that they can express their concerns. And it really comes down to, you've got to understand the other person's perspective and walk in their shoes. And the famous line I always use is, wherever you are on the religious spectrum, we were all taught that we're all God's children. And God wants us to love all of his children, whether they fit your image of what they should be. And I'm not trying to be preachy here. I'm just talking about, I was born and raised Catholic. I'm still Catholic. And I've had people question me on gay marriage. And I say, look, I have my personal views. Then I have the religion I belong to. But I'll tell you, at the end of the day, condemn the sin, never the sinner. If you really want to get to an extreme view on this, but it's not my place to judge. It's not my place to get into these type of questions. But we do walk a fine line at Church Mutual, because we're owned by all of our various denominations, and it is a balancing act. And at the end of the day, we have to be respectful of all views and harmonize those views. But we had an account we were pursuing, very prestigious, large institutional account. And the broker said, I heard you got a CEO that's really left wing. And he's a Muslim-loving, gay-loving person, and we're not going to do business with you. How do you feel about that? And I frankly said, I don't want you as a customer. You don't reflect the will of our organization. So we have said no to some people and have told them that while we respect their position on the political continuum, that's inconsistent with our mission. And we don't want to, get into a long argument, but you're never going to make everybody happy. That's just the way it is. We get asked a lot about our position in Black Lives Matter, and I'm not, you're not going to see our tagline, All Lives Matter. That's disrespectful to the movement. And Bruce and those dialogues we've had have told us. We're getting a lot of inquiries right now on the Asian American violence, and we've made a thoughtful statement we released. We're now being asked, well, what's your view on the Georgia voting laws? Where are you on that? And we've tried to be thoughtful, and the general view is anything that disenfranchises somebody's ability to vote runs counter to our culture. There are going to be right-wing Christian policyholders that probably don't like that Rich said that. But if they're true to their heart and they think deeply on this, they know I'm right. But we get, we have our moments where we collide with theology, but we try to be very apolitical as a corporation. You can't win. We don't pick sides. We don't tell people how to vote. We don't tell people, when we do bring in candidates before COVID, we bring them across the whole spectrum. We sponsored Hannah Jones to come talk at Toward One. I got some hate mail. People couldn't understand why in Wausau I was sponsoring a speaker like that because the premise of her treatise was flawed. At the end of it, and I literally, through a contact I had, called the Pulitzer Committee because there was this allegation they were going to pull, and they said, that's bunk. We're not pulling our prize. So we take the effort to understand and educate ourselves. But at the end of the day, she had a right to be heard. It's about education. You can then sort through the arguments. We bring people from all sides of the spectrum because, again, it's about education. It's about being informed on the issues. But the type of business we're in makes it definitely harder. But we don't shy away from it.
I'd just like to add, as Rich indicated, there's work to be done, and we're willing to do the work. Our efforts to promote diversity and inclusion have also not gone unnoticed. Our Women's Leadership Initiative was recognized last year by the American Property and Casualty Insurance Association. We also won the Driver of Diversity Award from MKE. And last year, Rich received the William Day Award by the Pennsylvania School Board Administration for diversity and inclusion efforts. So while we're proud of that, we also realize the journey continues. And if we raise the bar higher, we'll have a greater opportunity to ascend even greater heights.
So we have room for one more question. So I'm going to ask Patricia's question, and then I apologize to the rest of you that may have questions as well that we are not going to be able to get to due to our timing here. So Patricia's question is, if you have to measure it to reward it, would you be able to share what DEI measures you have for executives? And if so, was there a ramp up period for those?
So I want to make sure I understand the question. In the insurance industry, we're driven by metrics. When you go to a board and ask for money, and we talked about this, they're going to ask you to measure progress. Otherwise, you can game the system. So we firmly believe it's not worth doing if it's not measurable. So we have that buy-in across the company. But honestly, I didn't have a clue where to start. That's why we, have Bruce. Bruce and I relied on Kaleidoscope, who we mentioned, which is our outside vendor, to craft some measures for us. So that, and we don't use them to punish or threaten. We use them to educate. Okay, we're looking at our hiring trends. We're not doing really well in this category. What can we do to? Now, we do tie a percentage of your compensation. Usually with officers, it's largely at-risk bonus. But there is a measure on your annual increase too, that you've got to, it's one of the 5 pillars that Scott discussed. So you can't go at it willy-nilly. You really got to have people help you. And there are a lot of great corporations that have taken this journey before we did. And we're not ashamed to copy, cut and paste, and borrow, in which we've done. So we can give Patricia Bruce's email offline, and Bruce would be more than happy to share some of that those measures with you. We don't hide them. So work through we'll figure out a way to get it to Patricia. We're more than happy to share.
And on that note, I invite everybody to go learn, like Scott said, more about the D&I initiatives at churchmutual.org, and reach out to any one of them for if you have any further questions that you may have. We're right here. Thank you so much, Bruce, Scott, and Rich, for just a rich conversation and just a lot of thoughts. Any lasting comments that you like to say to the audience before we close up here?
Sure. I view this as, the old saying, when you go to the gym, no pain, no gain. It's not going to be easy. These are complicated issues we are wrestling with as a society and as a business. But the effort is so worth it. You will be a better company, and Scott gave you a lot of good statistics on why it's good. But more importantly, you're going to be a better person for it. You're going to feel better about your mission. And we have seen a perceptible uptick of millennials that want to join our company because they're jazzed about our mission and what we're doing. And that, that's such great validation. It's not about awards. It's not about plaques in the lobby. It's about the kind of note that Scott Steele got anonymously from an employee, or a survey that you do, when people tell you you're on the right path. So it takes courage. It's not easy. There will be people that question you. There will be people that push back. And, you got to be brave, and you've got to have a stiff upper lip and educate. And I was so excited and proud when Bruce told me that Ebenezer Baptist had been a policyholder, because Dr. King is one of my heroes. And another one of my heroes is, why am I drawing a blank? I'm seeing Morgan Freeman, but it's not Morgan Freeman in the movie Invictus. It's the leader of South Africa. And I'm drawing, but again,
Nelson
Mandela, one of my heroes. And it's or Mahatma Gandhi, it's how you respond to hate says a lot about you.
Yes.
It says a lot about your journey and your company. Because if it was easy, everybody'd do it. It's not easy. And I don't want to pull any punches with anybody on this call. There will be detractors, but the journey is worth it.
Any lasting comments from Bruce, you or Scott? Thank you for that wonderful message, Rich. We're good.
Rich nailed it. Rich ended it. It's great.
Okay. Scott?
No, I just want to say, thank you to everybody. And if there's any follow-up out there, feel free to reach out to us. I mean, on a journey, it's not fun to go by yourself. It's good to have company. So if anybody wants to follow up on anything, feel free to reach out to us.
Yes, and lots of thank yous in the chat for this conversation. Thank you so much, Church Mutual, for just, starting this conversation with the Wausau Chamber. We really appreciate your time and what you have to offer and learning about your journey. So again, guys, feel free to go to churchmutual.com. I apologize, /diversity. Dawn put it in the chat to learn more about their initiative and reach out to the leaders on this call today. So we appreciate everyone's time, and I hope you have a great day.